TF2's Scream Fortress event has been around for 16 years at this point and has become a long-standing gaming tradition. Every October, more and more players come back to the game to kill some bosses, try some unique game modes, and farm out those contracts for them sweet goodie bags. As of 2025, there are now 60 seasonal maps within the Scream Fortress rotation, and that got me thinking, which ones are the best? How many of these spookified tourist attractions are actually worth playing? Well, I figured we indulge ourselves for an hour-long yap sesh and rank every map from best to worst, all using the tried and true formula, a tier list. Back to basics we go. There isn't really much of a hardcore criteria for this one. Everything's entirely down to how much I personally enjoy playing on these maps. This means that I do have a couple of takes here that might catch a few of you off guard. But that's the fun in a ranking like this. Feel free to give your own thoughts in the comments below. Not much else to say beyond that, so let's start out with the bottom of the barrel, F tier. These are the maps that, at least by their modern implementations, are absolute garbage. I play them once for the contract candy bag, but after that, never again. And starting off at number 60, we have what I believe to be the worst Scream Fortress map in the entire game, Lava Pit. I don't know what they were thinking by adding this one to the game. This is the most obvious dead-on-arrival concept I've ever seen plastered onto an old map. The terrain is nigh unwalkable. There are bottomless pits around the entire fucking map. Now, that alone limits player agency in terms of fighting around the map, but add spells into the mix, and all of a sudden those problems get multiplied tenfold. Of any map in the game to throw in the spell mechanic, why pick the one whose bedrock got the Thanos treatment? When your ass cheeks aren't 8 inches away from a hot stone massage, you're getting crammed into tight corridors full of underworld crits and fireball spam. That's not even mentioning how Gravel Pit already had the problem of spreading player fights too thin, especially when a 12v12 lobby isn't the status quo. You're not shooting much, and when you do, you're limited by the floor not having much floor. Also, quick side note, this map was added literally less than a year after the Christmas reskin got added. Why? With every other map coming up, there was at least a semblance of a workable premise, but a third version of an old school map that already had some fundamental issues to begin with? This was the most self-evident flunk on the planet, and the fact that Valve opted to push it out anyways confuses me more than anything. Number 59, Ghost Fort. The main attraction of Scream Fortress 2012, back when Valve centered each update around one grand premise. This was the update that introduced Marasmus alongside the vomit of hallucinogens he would spew out. Alongside that was the Wheel of Fate acting as a periodic server-wide RTD. And it all took place on a lakeside reskin, a pretty well-liked map all things considered. So, in the modern era, why is Ghost Fort commonly touted as one of the worst maps in the Scream Fortress lineup? Well, to put it simply, you can't really play the game. Marasmus does not leave you the fuck alone. You can't go more than 2 minutes without him prancing around for another batch of Houdini terrorism. Now that on its own isn't too bad, until you remember that every time he shows up, he resets the point, you aren't able to recap it until Marasmus is defeated, and worst of all, the fucking truces. Every time the boss is in play, you cannot attack anyone on the opposing team. Your enjoyable, modified PvP gameplay is constantly getting interrupted for the 14th server-wide yawn fest of Pin the Crockett on the Wizard. Need I even mention the 7-minute point timers, which just make games drag on and on and on to the point where it's become a cultural TF2 meme. It just isn't fun. Either remove the truces, reduce the point timer, or only have Marasmus show up once or twice a game, because Ghost Fort, as it stands today, is not viewed fondly at all. Number 58, Hellstone. Hellstone is what you get when you take every absurdist element of Scream Fortress, throw it into a blender, and press puree. As it turns out, having spells being funneled into some of the tightest choke points in the game, on top of multiple bosses aiming to one-shot you at the same time, doesn't breed for the greatest PB&J combination. That's outside of all the Crumpkin rockets and sniper sightlines turning every corner peek into a gamble already. Oh yeah, and fuck incapacitating the red team whenever they get too close to the cart. If you want people to stop going near it, maybe don't make a map that's more long and thin than Chile. That last point is also the brown standard as far as final chokes go. This is where games go to die. Hellstone's the TF2 equivalent of giving a 5th grader an 8x12 canvas with an unlimited amount of paint buckets and telling them to go wild. Just layers of shit on top of more layers of shit for the sole purpose of showcasing that it's possible. Oh, it's possible, alright, just not very fun. Number 57, Graveyard. I know a lot of people actually really like Graveyard because, hey, it's an arena map, but you can do things when you die. But does anyone ever stop to think about whether or not what you're actually doing is fun? You're just roaming around as a dispenser bitch. How do you guys enjoy this? Hot take, I actually prefer getting tossed into spectate mode after dying. At least then I can grab a handful of goldfish crackers or read YouTube comments calling me gay. Now, if I don't want to play as a lobotomized medic but the other guy does, I'm putting my team at a disadvantage. It's cool to see Lumberyard return in some capacity, and I do find the Ultra Spell a fun addition to break stalemates, but outside of that, it's just an arena map without the talkative community environment to make the downtime medicine go down easier. It's a shitty game mode otherwise, and Valve made the right call by getting rid of it. Number 56, Ioduct. Take everything I said about Ghost Fort and Control-V that shit right here. Ioduct is a bit more tolerable purely because the point timers are much shorter, but outside of that, it has all of the same issues. Monoculus spawns way too often, resets the point every time he appears, and you're locked into a truce until his HP reaches 0. I'd argue the truce is even more detrimental on Ioduct because the whole point of running the Underworld Gauntlet was for the Kritzkrieg Ubercharge at the end. Now, barring the final portal, all it does is boost the damage you do against the boss and nothing else. This mechanic is just boring now, and nobody cares about it outside of achievement farming. When you're actually able to play the spookified version of Viaduct, it's a great map, but over half the game is spent chasing around this dumbass eye, and it gets very old very quickly. Number 55. Terror. Another linear payload map where spells are funneled non-stop through extremely tight choke points. Something tells me this will be a recurring theme going forward. I don't know if there's a way to make this work. Blue can't even leave spawn half the time without getting a mass AoE shitfest clocking them in the mouth. The Marasmus effects also break up the flow of gameplay way too much. Usually they're not that big of a deal, but nothing breaks push morale harder than getting forced into a medieval lock out of nowhere. And like Hellstone, Terror's last point is where games go to die. Just a giant linear fishhook surrounded by a death pit that gets non-stop flushed out by spells. This is another one I beat the contract for and never look back. Number 54, Sandcastle. This one's a De Groot Keep reskin, but all spells are constantly online. Yeah, this one was always destined to fall into the niche within a niche territory. The idea behind this is just conceptually awful. The melee-only limitation is so restricting that spells just kinda de facto have a heightened presence, more so than any other map in the game. I'm not even that big of a spell hater, all things considered, but medieval mode isn't the right place for them. One purple spell alone is enough to instantly one-shot everything in sight, and considering you get them for free every time you wrap up the meat-hopping obstacle course, that ends up happening a lot. Couple that with the fact that you're forced into reloading every 2 rounds, and you end up spending more time in the pre-game than you do actually spell fragging. It's a minigame intermission for a free contract goodie bag and nothing more. Could be worse, but not exactly a fun time. Number 53, Devastation. I'll talk about zombie infection as a whole later on, because I find most of the maps to be relatively comparable in quality. Devastation, however, is the odd one out. There is one severely broken, extremely obnoxious camp spot on the lower level that is universally camped every time. A lot of zombie abilities have their lines of sight completely hampered, and the Emp Bomb can be difficult to line up when compared to other maps. It just feels like the same game every single time without that much variety, and if you do try to spice it up by utilizing the other 90% of the map, it's really a bitch to navigate through all the different stories and accompanying pathways up to them. The variety here is lower than any other zombie infection map in the game, and for that reason, I think it's easily the worst option available. So those were the real hardcore stinkers, the most painful maps of the bunch. Now we move on to D tier. These are the maps that have a couple of redeeming qualities here and there, but they face brutal design issues that are unignorable. You'll probably notice some common themes here. And at number 52, we have Bonesaw, one of 2 Halloween-themed payload race maps, and the only one to not feature spells as a mechanic. Credit where credit's due, Bonesaw doesn't feel the need to compensate for that by throwing a bunch of gimmicks on top of it. A Horseman reskin is all you gotta worry about beyond the pumpkin bombs and alike. In fact, I'd argue that 90% of the map is pretty well designed and not a bad DM map, all things considered. So why put it so low? Because the last 10% is fucking horrible. Bonesaw might just have the shittiest final point of literally any map in the game, seasonal or otherwise. Like other payload race maps, Bonesaw's final stage forces you to hold the cart on the last point in order to cap it. Not bad in principle, except for the fact that the opposing team is given a full-ass spam tower with a full line of sight right above the capture zone. If you're an explosive class, you are given free reign to hurl as many projectiles as you want from the perch. And if you ever try intercepting them, get ready for a fully healed spawn wave to come kick your shit in, and also maybe give the demo man a crumpkin for an easy one-shot. That's ignoring the fact that you need to worry about the enemy team flanking from the ground level as well. Like I said, Bonesaw, generally speaking, isn't a bad map, but it feels like over half of the game is spent stalemating at this one area that is genuinely the most miserable part of any map in the game. It would legitimately climb like 20 spots if this one design decision was tossed out during the brainstorming stage. Number 51, Precipice. This one's just kind of awful on a fundamental level. I'm not sure there's another payload map in the game that has shittier sightlines than Precipice. Coupled with how player dense the map gets halfway through, and it just becomes a non-stop choke fest while Timmy the sniper main is picking off everyone from 18 light years away. Typically with TF2 maps, it's one or the other. Either it's power class stacking to overpower the other team, or awful sightlines that force people onto classes like Scout and Spy to incapacitate the team sniper abusing them. Precipice just kinda has the worst of both worlds, where the map is too condensed for power classes to not dominate, but whenever you die, half the time it was probably a headshot you quite literally could not see coming. Spells don't help this dynamic either, but thankfully they're not as prominent as they are on other maps. See, that's what makes Precipice unique. It isn't shitty because of a mechanic gone wrong or poor implementation of an otherwise good idea. None of that here. The map layout is just bad. Looks pretty cool though. Number 50, Spooky Ridge. Similar story to Bonesaw on this one. The first half of the map plays pretty well. Nothing amazing, nothing terrible, just a run-of-the-mill attack-defend map. But that final point, man, holy shit. The sniper sightlines are hell, the flank is tight and easily locked down by a sentry, and the entire point is surrounded by an air blast primed death pit. The portal gimmick is also surprisingly underwhelming, acting as little more than a mode of transporting yourself around the map. It can occasionally put you in advantageous positions, but most of the time it just goes unused due to how little impact it has. This one fumbles the ball so hard in the latter half that it ends up being all you remember by the time the game ends. The layout is annoying and the gimmick is boring. I find the coffin kills to be a nice flavor element, but that's pretty much the only positive of the map. Number 49, Brimstone. Oh look, it's another payload map where the main problem is turning every minor choke point into a spell-laden Chernobyl. Add in some skeletons, some Erasmus RTD, and one of the most cancerous sniper sightlines in the entire game, and you've got a map about as enjoyable as getting fisted with a lit curling iron. This is yet another payload map that just shoves every Halloween mechanic into a meat grinder and hopes something gourmet pops out. I prefer this one slightly more to Hellstone and Terror, because at the very least you're given some decent high ground to play with, but I'd rather not need a rock climbing wall to avoid a crocodile river. I'd rather just take out the crocs. I do have a soft spot for the kart race at the end though. I'll hear nothing about that. Number 48, Gravestone. You may have noticed by now that if a payload map ends in stone, it isn't very good. Too many spells into tight choke points, too many bosses. It's another map that's a mutant Pokemon generator of TF2. Gravestone's a bit better than the others due to the last point being pretty offense friendly. It's not too hard for blue to spawn camp whenever you reach this area of the map. But outside of that, nothing really differentiates it from the other spell bukkake maps you'll play once for the contracts and then not much beyond that. Number 47, Outburst. Alright, I'll be honest, I don't really fuck with Saxton doesn't hail that much to begin with, so throwing it into Scream Fortress doesn't do anything for me at all. It has a lot of the same campy gameplay issues as Zombie Infection, except with literally nothing to do once you're out of commission. Playing as the Hail can be fun, and there are some tense moments every now and again, but usually once I get my bug contract turn in, I'm out. Number 46, Devil Cross. The first appearance from the 2025 Scream Fortress event. It's the same Double Cross we all know and some people love, but spells are online 24/7 while the Megalo Ghost Train charges through mid. Not a fan of the latter too much. It's a bit too fast and takes up a bit too much of the map for it to justify being an insta-kill mechanic. It doesn't do much in preventing the awful Double Cross sightlines either, so overall, this one's a pretty big downgrade. If CTF maps wouldn't drag on forever, then maybe the sour taste wouldn't be there as much, but there are so many better maps to blow a 45-minute play session on. Number 45, Erebus. Alright, so Erebus has a reputation for being one of, if not the worst Scream Fortress map in recent memory. And while I'm not quite on that train, the map is still pretty bad. It has the payload problem of spells getting funneled into extremely tight choke points, but at the very least, Attack Defend is a more salvageable game type to have that problem present. The point captures are fast enough to where the pushes aren't too agonizing, even if they do get spammed out with steroid buffs half the time. It might be Dust Bowl Spell Edition, but that's still more preferable than a quarter of the other maps in the game for me. Number 44, Dusker. A lot of people are saying that this is the best map from this year's Scream Fortress update, but I just could not disagree more. The entire map feels extremely congested, explosive classes are given so much free spam cover around the point, and the round-the-corner ambushes are a constant presence. It's probably the most power class favored Scream Fortress map that we've gotten in years, and steamrolls based around those team comps is a pervasive issue. Also, I know Halloween maps having a more dampened lighting to them can occasionally fuck with team recognition, but Dusker's omnipresent red tinge might just be the worst offender in that regard. I've had more second and third takes on this map than any other in recent memory. I'm glad you guys like this one, but for me, it just isn't fun at all. Now we're gonna break off from the numbers for a moment to talk about Zombie Infection, as the 5 remaining maps are all getting lumped together. This was a new VScript game mode we got back in 2023, and truth be told, I've been mixed on it for a while now. There are some positives to be sure. The zombies being no slouch provides a lot of tension as the clock winds closer and closer to zero, and the zombie abilities are really well done on the thematic ends. The Kamikaze demos and Sniper Spit AoEs are especially on brand. That being said, the gameplay of these maps just isn't very good. Everyone is huddling together in the same area like a pack of sardines until eventually someone gets bored and throws themselves to the wolves. The round only really gets going when there's enough EMP spam to disable the sentries so the zombies could actually walk 5 feet without getting burned down by a turret autopilot. While finally dismantling the fort and watching everyone run around like scattered ants is very fun, outside of that, just running into the same team-stacked meat grinder over and over again until the stars end up aligning isn't very enjoyable. It's a worthwhile attempt at a game mode, but I do think it falls kind of flat. However, there is one feature within the game mode worth noting, and in my opinion, is an extremely overlooked addition: All Talk. Scream Fortress has always been a cheesy community event where everyone comes together to enjoy some unorthodox content. So it's always bothered me that this was never an optional toggle at the bare minimum for any other map in the game. Every Zombie Infection map has it on by default, and that is a godsend. Being able to interact with a greater percentage of the server makes the borderline AFK nature of the game mode actually fun. Like, not just tolerable, actually fun. The gameplay might take a backseat to the social interactions, but when the gameplay is borderline AFK, I don't really mind. It becomes a lot more of a chill, pleasant environment reminiscent of modern-day community servers, and the 1st to 9 structure really gives plenty of time for those player relationships to marinate. That alone keeps me around way longer than getting sentry farmed as a zombie for the 18th time in a row. We already went over Devastation and why I think that one is the obvious worst, but the 5 we have left are all pretty comparable. So, at number 43, 3, we have Atoll. Too many high ground sentry spots that limit the movement ability of the zombies and force a greater percentage of them onto zombie engies for the EMP grenade. It's a bigger flaw compared to the other maps, but once the high ground sentries are dealt with, things usually continue as they normally would. Number 42, Blaze Hatton. Similar issue to Atoll, where a lot of the high ground sentry spots limit movement, but a lot of them have lower lines of sight due to how dense the high ground actually is. Manhattan isn't as big as one might think, so despite having some room to run around with, you end up quartering yourself a lot. Zombie favored for sure, but that gives it some nice tension. Number 41, Woods. This one's got 2 big camp spots on both ends of the map, with a giant lake in the middle separating them. This makes half of the map not enjoyable to run around on, but at the very least, the 2 forts aren't overly oppressive on the human side. Number 40, Murky. What I like about this one is how much high ground it gives to the zombies. It gives snipers a wider field of view to shoot spit from, and lets zombie demos charge off the tree branches to carry their momentum. It's definitely zombie favored, maybe the most of any map in the game, but I think that makes for some interesting tension. And number 39, Sanitarium. The best zombie infection map, and I think most people would be inclined to agree. Thematically, it's extremely well done, and I much prefer how the mansion naturally disperses players into different rooms on different floors. It's a lot less campy than the others, scale-wise it's the perfect fit, and the elevator ends up giving it some nice flavor. You could argue for this one being a special case and maybe deserving of a higher rank, but for me personally, the flaws of the game mode are just a bit too big to ignore. Fun attempt at something new, I'm glad other people like it, it's just not for me. Number 38, Bloodwater. Bloodwater has all the same problems as the ICS payload maps, but at the very least has a small nostalgic familiarity factor that can carry it forward a bit. A lot of the changes made to the map layout are actually well-warranted additions. Adding a fence to the second point to nerf sniper sightlines, giving an alternate pathway on third to make the flank more easily accessible, giving offense another door to leave spawn from when pushing last. Lots of cool additions here, but you know the drill by now. Too many bosses fucking your shit up out of nowhere, too many spells getting funneled into tight choke points, and that's on top of dealing with the typical problems that come with pushing Badwater last. Not as bad as the others, but still pretty bad. Number 37. Hassle Castle. Yet another well-beloved payload map getting a reskin alongside a spell punch card with unlimited access. Hassle Castle is infested with them, even more so than Bloodwater, but at the very least the map is a lot more open, so you're given more room to play around with them. Unless you're inside the cave. Good luck on that push to second. And that last point, man, if you thought Upward Last was bad originally, you've seen nothing yet. It's cool that they gave the defending team an extra platform to apply pressure from, but it often becomes another game of spell cornhole, so this one's kind of a wash. It seems like Valve have learned that spells getting shoved into tight chokes in tandem with a constantly active objective just inherently leads to a poorly designed map all around. Hassle Castle seems to be the last of its kind, and hopefully it remains that way for the foreseeable future. Number 36, Soul Mill. Another old school map reskin, only this time the problem is that it doesn't push the envelope enough. Soul Mill might just be the single most pointless map addition they've ever put in the game. It's just a Sawmill reskin, which was already an overrated map to begin with, but now the blades are spooky and there's a few radioactive puddles that do damage if you touch them. Add in some skeletons and an underworld section so hilariously long almost no one ever elects to use it, and you have a map that just doesn't provide enough to justify its inclusion. As bad as Bloodwater and Hassle Castle are, at the very least they tried to provide a fresh experience. Soul Mill, quite frankly, doesn't even try. Number 35. Slasher. This map just honestly makes me sad, because both in layout and in visuals, this is one of the best Halloween maps in the game. I love the balance of high ground and low ground, the transitional areas between spawn and the point are enjoyable to duke it out on. Slasher's got a lot going for it on a fundamental level. The problem is that this is a Scream Fortress map, and we don't care about fundamentals around here. Slasher is the lone Halloween map to have an underworld portal open non-stop. Whenever you please, anyone can enter at any time and roll for those purple playmakers. This is not ideal for a King of the Hill map. Kinda turns the King of the Underworld into the King of the game. All it takes is one team's Engie to build a level 3 in the portal room, and that team has free access to an elite level spell farm that anyone can use whenever they please. This makes spell lobbing the point a more over-centralizing strategy strategy than on any other Halloween map in the game by far. And with a 6-minute point timer, you'll be dealing with that a lot. If this was the only batshit insane mechanic, maybe it could be overlooked. But they also decided to shove every single boss into the game onto this map. Why? Why would you make a really solid King of the Hill map and candy coat it in Halloween sewage to the point where that's all anyone can taste? They had truces on launch too. It used to be even worse. Slasher might just have the most missed potential of any seasonal map in the game. And I hope that one day it gets some desperately needed pruning shears taken to it. Number 34, Cower House. Cower House is very tricky to rank because as a map on its own, it's actually not that bad. It's a powerhouse reskin, but with a newly added underground section that opens up periodically, allowing for the opposing team to backcap the final point. Personally, I'm not really a fan of this. The massive team fights inside the powerhouse chokes was where most of the fun came from. Minimizing that just kinda minimizes the whole package, at least for me. But base powerhouse is a pretty good map all things considered, and there aren't any spells or bosses to ruin the fun, so what's the problem? Well, there's a silver lining to the team fights not happening as often, and that's because Cower House runs like shit. The frame drops here are absolutely abysmal when inside of a player skirmish. Hell, it can lag when almost nobody else is in view. For that reason, I have to knock down the map significantly. It's not a bad map design-wise, but when the final point clusterfuck map struggles to actually run the final point clusterfucks, it's hard to give it a passing grade. Number 33, Ghoul Pit. Ghoul Pit thankfully keeps things a lot more tame compared to the other payload maps, purely because spells are MIA. Don't let that empty book at the bottom fool you. They were yanked out of the map early on to fix some kind of map exploit or something. Probably didn't need to use a hammer in place of a scalpel, but it was definitely for the best. Ghoul Pit achieves the bare minimum standard of actually being playable. However, like Precipice, the layout just isn't very good. Too many long pathways that funnel players into tight chokes where red have insurmountable height advantages, and the sniper sightlines don't do this map any favors either. On the midpoints of the map, you'll get a bunch of skeleton spawns that don't do much to enhance the gameplay in either a good or bad way. It's just kind of a temporary distraction. However, there are a couple of interesting areas to fight on. The multiple pathways running from second to third in particular are pretty well designed. There just isn't enough of it, unfortunately. Ghoul Pit's a nice reprieve from getting perpetually chucked with particle beanbags, but clearing that bar isn't enough to give you much of a trophy gallery. Number 32, Spineyard. The only payload map in the game that grants access to spells that I actually find somewhat tolerable. They drop off these skeleton dudes who attack you using SMGs, which both incentivize you to engage with the map's mechanic, but also make spells a lot more of a scarce resource. Doesn't hurt that they end up butt-fucking the snipers more than any other class. Even when spells are in play though, there's enough winding corridors and branching pathways to make them not overly oppressive. It's admirable how spells were handled here. This is about as well as you could have done them. The problem is everything else. The hill push towards the second point is unbearably long. Feels like the first point of Thunder Mountain sometimes. And god, that last point is one of the single worst parts of any TF2 map in the game. Just a non-stop uphill climb while red has a giant balcony right outside the spawn doors. It'd be one thing if it were upward last, but the balcony is close enough to where red isn't suffering that much damage fall off. And the entire push is being done through one of the most linear chokes in the game. It isn't as bad as Bonesaw last, but it's getting there. I'm glad that Spineyard handled spells properly. Really, it deserves praise for that. The layout itself just doesn't do it for me. Finally, halfway through the list, we're getting our first crack into the C tier. This is the area where a lot of the maps are just kind of okay. Nothing amazing, nothing horribly awful. You can get some moderate enjoyment out of these ones every now and again. Number 31, Sinshine. This one feels very similar to Soul Mill in that it was a reskin of a map that I find to be incredibly overrated. Now granted, Sinshine was added into the game before Sunshine ever was, so at the very least its inclusion was justifiable. But overall, it's just not really my thing. 5CP maps have a lot of walking around to do, more so than any of the other game modes. And because of this, I find the visuals and atmosphere of a map end up taking on a greater priority. If I'm not fighting much, at the very least I should enjoy hanging out there. Sunshine for me just doesn't really have that vibe. I do prefer a lot of the design decisions made. The second points are a lot less enclosed than the ones on Sunshine, and the final point having a giant hole right in front of it forces the enemy team to be more careful when rushing last. But for me, Sunshine's just a big bowl of meh. Nothing technically wrong with it, I just don't have strong feelings about this one. Number 30, Dark Marsh. Thematically, this one's pretty cool. Invading an abandoned castle set outside of a secluded marsh. That said, Dark Marsh isn't anything to write home about. It's one of the better attack-defend Scream Fortress maps purely because the terrain is a lot more freeing. The main combat areas and the flanks are a lot wider than most of the other maps in the game, and the castle section is surprisingly friendly for most classes out there, despite the 90-degree choke at the end defining the final push. Unfortunately, the spell spam during that section, and indeed every other point for that matter, leads me to not enjoy playing on this one that much. Also, it's probably just a me thing, but I find the indoor areas way too monochromatic. The actual interior aesthetic is just kinda dull for me. I could see myself either liking or hating this one even more in the future, but for right now, I think middle of the pack is fine. Number 29, Marshlands. Yet another recent map addition, and of the 5 we got, I do believe Marshlands has a case for being the best. At a first glance, I didn't really understand the game mode. It has a briefcase like Capture the Flag, an icon reminiscent of Special Delivery, timers you'd find on King of the Hill, and animated borders that resemble player destruction barriers. In actuality, it's one big game of hold the flag. First to 3 minutes wins. It's a fun game mode concept that I do think works well conceptually, but the gameplay isn't really all that special. All the fighting happens in a relatively small, tight area of the map, and this is because this is the only area where you can hold the briefcase without it being forcibly dropped. The vast majority of the map just ends up not getting used because the defending team needs to coalesce around their flag holder while the attacking team needs to meet them there. As far as newly added TF2 game modes go, I think this is one of the better ones we've seen in recent years. There's probably a workable map concept that could make this one really shine. As it stands right now though, Marshlands is just very C tier. Number 28, Afterlife. Afterlife may have been a bug-infested shithole on launch, but once it was patched into a playable state, it's not that bad. It's a reskin of the old arena map Ravine, though unlike its base form, you're not permanently in the penalty box if you ever die. You get sent down to a proverbial loser's bracket and fight it out with everyone else who also died. After getting a kill and running back to the portal, you'll be back on the mainland. It's a clever way of circumventing the arena downtime, and balance-wise, it's done very well. That being said, the gameplay loop of Afterlife can become very repetitive. The map itself was already pretty small, and now, half the time, you're squashing it out in the underworld section, which is even smaller. I'm not saying it's bad, just you're heavily reliant on differing player encounters to keep things fresh, not really the map itself. It doesn't have a lot of staying power in my eyes, but you can get a lot of fun rounds in before moving on to the next map. Smart concept, I'll give it that. Number 27, Corruption. The best Halloween payload map in the game, but to be honest, that's like being a champion at kindergarten math. It says a lot when a map that forces you into an asylum is more enjoyable than Particle Rape Chokefest Exhibit H. That's Corruption's main gimmick. You'll periodically get thrown into a melee-only maze-like underworld, whacking the other team while everyone searches for the exit. It's a pretty fun gimmick, and it in and of itself is not an issue. But the problem is that the entire game grinds to a screeching halt whenever the clock strikes 12. The payload cart immediately gets the brakes taken to it while a portal summons on top, and you're forced into playing the hospital minigame lest you goof around with a thumb up your ass doing nothing. I understand you can't really make it optional without giving offense an absurd territorial advantage, but it's an unfortunate balancing mechanic that can really kill the pacing of a round. Outside of that, it's a pretty bog standard payload map, about as average layout wise as you're gonna get. But that's still a better template to work off of for a Scream Fortress payload map than any of the others, mid as it may be. Number 26, Circus. A bit of a spoiler alert going forward, player destruction is the Scream Fortress game mode that by far has the best reputation in my view. Not just because it's a very underrated game mode that's seldom queued in the base game, but mainly because the more eccentric elements of all the Halloween maps don't tend to dominate its core gameplay all that much. Circus, especially with the absence of spells, falls under a similar umbrella. The problem is, despite that, the entire map is just sensory overload to the extreme. The bright lights everywhere, the giant giant flaming ring in the middle, players shooting themselves across the fucking map. The clown dimension in particular feels like Freaky Fair on steroids. Yeah, they're fine gimmicks, but Nucleus was already known for being more of a deathmatch map instead of a King of the Hill one anyways. For a long time, this was one of my least favorite Scream Fortress maps in the game for that reason. It put a lot of sparkly bullshit on a map that didn't need it. But at the end of the day, most of what you're up to is just running around and killing on a map that's well suited for running around and killing. And that gameplay skeleton is enough for it to be tolerable for me nowadays. I still think that a less is more approach would have worked better here, but in the modern day, I'd rather play this one than most of the other maps in the game. Number 25, Molder Grove. Another King of the Hill map, and surprise, it won't be the last of them. Like Circus, a lot of people think that Molder Grove is bottom tier trash, and honestly, I can see why that is. The map's main gimmick is that every time the control point is capped, a bunch of underworld portals spawn in. This allows members of each team to participate in a 3v3 segmented arena battle, with the team that wins bringing home all of the buff bacon. This mechanic is, quite frankly, fucking garbage. The underworld area feels way too big, encounters often end in stalemates, and you spend more time waiting for other players to join the arena than actually fighting it out. This causes a lot of players to just not engage with the 3v3s at all. You're wasting so much uptime as a class in exchange for a chance at a few seconds of underworld perks. It's not even a guarantee. This trade-off is dog shit, and nowadays anyone smart enough knows to never take it. So in the end, it just kind of plays like a claustrophobic King of the Hill map. Like Dusker, power classes end up dominating. The chokeholds, spam positions, and flying Crumpkins make that easily apparent. However, it does have some enjoyable flanks and a lot more height variety around mid to melt the snowballs before they start rolling too hard. Definitely a flawed map, but for me, it still cracks into the upper half for those reasons. Number 24, Perks. Perks is a really interesting concept with incredible replay value, held back by its map layout and typical arena downtime. Every round, you're presented with 3 different series of stat buffs that each team votes on intermittently. Every round, they'll be stacked on top of each other, so by the end, both teams are kill farming with ironclad iterations of each class. Fantastic idea, and it's pretty well executed. The problem is that outside of the point, the entire middle area is segmented into very claustrophobic cubbies without much room to run around on. Until the point opens up, it may as well be another version of Dust Bowl on crack. That'd probably be forgivable, if not for the fact that Perks has a shitload of downtime where you're not doing much. Surprisingly, the arena spectate jail isn't as bad as you'd think. Most teams opt for the medic resurrection buff whenever it's online, and that goes a long way in increasing the amount of uptime on the field. Voting on Perks, however, is a different story. Every round needs a 30-second vote break in between, and when each game only averages a minute or two, that starts to add up pretty fast. Perks has a lot of potential. Its core gameplay progression is one I find to be a lot of fun. It just needs a map that's less congested around the objective and big enough to where rounds can last longer. If we get that, it might work out a lot better. Number 23. Hell Tower. Originally, I had Hell Tower a lot, and I do mean a lot higher. This was the first Halloween map to introduce the item box iteration of spells that we see in the game today. For a while, this gave the map a very unique position in the Halloween lineup before Valve took this concept and infinity downed on it. What was once an innovative novelty has now become a lot more mundane, fatiguing even. And now, in the 2020s era, Hell Tower's just kind of lost its gameplay identity. That actually matters quite a fair bit, because spells present a fuckload of issues balance-wise, especially when you throw rares into the mix. Every cart push is hammered with meteor showers or monoculous eyes, and the only way to prevent them from happening is to spawn camp the other team with your own meteor showers and monoculous eyes. You could even argue that Hell Tower should be lower for that reason alone, but High Tower itself is a really fun and open DM map where regular spells aren't typically over-centralizing. Also, the Red Man and Blue Tark map theming gives it flavor far beyond your average Scream Fortress map. Plus, the hell fights at the end are some of the better ones in the game. Respectable qualities to be sure, but Valve getting drunk on spells in every modern era update has definitely lessened its appeal. Number 22. Megalo. I actually thought for a while that Megalo would be a lot higher, but the longer I've queued into it, the more its flaws have become apparent to me. It's a nice looking map with a lot of fun flanks and enjoyable areas to fight on. However, playing the objective is where a fair bit of problems can arise. Megalo's main gimmick is that the point will be raised or lowered to 3 differing track levels over the course of a game. Once in position, a giant ghost train will Kool-Aid Man through the point, killing any player that it touches. If that were the only issue, it would be manageable, but you also have to watch players coming from the flank, players bombing from above whenever the point's been lowered, and all of this while in the middle of a massive sniper sightline, surrounded by a death pit. Yeah, I'll leave my team to deal with that, thank you very much. Megalo has a bad case of nucleus syndrome, where everything surrounding the point is really fun to fight on, but actually focusing on the objective is where frustration starts to brew. Not a horrible map, but not a great one either. Number 21, Slime. Now here's a map that's actually jumped up a dozen or so ranks in recent years, mostly because the base layout of Slime is really well done. Like Molder Grove, this one's main gimmick is entirely tied to an effect upon point cap. In this case, it's an army of fish bros chasing you down for some unwanted touchies and a face full of goo. Dan Schneider's wet dream. They're pretty much skeleton reskins with a Mark for Death debuff attached to them, but I do enjoy how much character these ones have. I also enjoy dropping the lone rare spell on the map right in the shallow waters outside of their hideout. It can be a fun risk-reward play that's pretty well balanced. Slime's only real problem is how annoying a sentry can be at mid. The fish boys are so common and spell locations so condensed that being able to keep both of them locked down for your team feels a bit too overpowered. It doesn't happen too much, but when it does, the whole game snowballs into a roll from there. Outside of that, it's pretty alright, I guess. Number 20, Carnival of Carnage. Like Hell Tower, Carnival of Carnage was a lot higher during the rough draft of this video. I have so many good memories playing this map, and if I asked any of my IRL friends which one is their favorite, it would easily be this one. But man, for all the nostalgia I have about this era of TF2, the map sure does have its issues. I'm not even talking about the bumper car minigames at the end. For a Scream Fortress event, I'm cool with a gimmick that doesn't take itself too seriously. The issue I have is mainly with how the special delivery game mode intertwines with the other Scream Fortress mechanics. When capping the shuttle, the objective requires the whole team to stack on top of each other to make sure that the intel holder stays alive. The problem is that an entire push can become invalidated by a single spell user a la Hell Tower. Even spells like Bats or Invisibility, which typically don't impact the game all that much, can permanently invalidate a large push from anyone on the lift, let alone the rare spells, which are the easiest gimmies in the world. Marasmus teleporting everyone to mid for the Wheel of Fate is also something that should have never been added. It just ends up being a free kill for whoever picked up the meteor shower last minute. Like Megalo, playing the objective on this one is very frustrating, so I just treat it like a DM map with the occasional status effects and bumper car minigames. I'd love to put it higher, but those rose-tinted glasses aren't blinding enough. Number 19, Crasher. Yet another custom game type that I actually think works really well for a Halloween event. And on launch, it quickly became one of my favorite Scream Fortress maps in the game. Playing as a hulked out version of each class and figuring out the best combos to rush the other team was something that offered a lot of unique gameplay variety. On launch. Unfortunately, Crasher has gotten metagame to shit. Year after year, it's the exact same thing. Every team has a giant heavy, every team's got a vac medic to counter their giant heavy, and every team's got a whip soldier to zoom to the gates quicker. If the other team is using this combo, and you're not, get ready for an incoming 3-0. Nowadays, Crasher's a map that's less of an Attack on Titan style war of attrition, and more of a pray the other team has a non-heavy player stupid enough to steal the growth power up. Now I get a lot of fun from single-handedly clearing out the front lines to make an easier path for the team's bomb carrier. It gives a lot of the same cathartic feels as a strong uber push. It can take a few tries, but I think gunning for the giant power-up 24/7 just isn't as fun as it used to be. Crasher is a fundamentally sound map, but the player base optimized all the fun out of the game, and in all likelihood, this was destined to happen. I like the concept a lot, but for that reason, I can't put it any higher than C tier. Number 18, Monster Bash. I've heard a lot of people put this one in their top 5s over the years, and while I'm not willing to go that far, it is one of the better maps in the game. Monster Bash is often compared to Nucleus for its circular design, more DM-centric nature, and its difficult to realize objective, the latter of which is why I have it lower on my rank comparatively. Monster Bash is a very fun layout, a bit on the tighter side, but with how many spells, crumpkins, and alternate pathways the map has, the player density is loose enough to where most parts of the the maps see regular play. It's when the objective comes online that Monster Bash can frequently go to shit. This map has a giant pit in the middle that doesn't kill you, but instead throws you into a mini obstacle course. First of all, the axes are frequently bugged. The skewer hitboxes will often not line up with the animation. But more to the point, you exit the pit with a full restore back to max HP, a Kritzkrieg Uber charge, and a rare spell on top of it, all right beside an entirely open, extremely claustrophobic deposit zone. This is fucking broken and not enjoyable in the slightest to play against. Farming kills for a whole minute only for someone to wipe it all away with a meteor shower or crocket spam for zero risk whatsoever is just horrible game design. The more swingy, wrecking ball nature of the map, very enjoyable. Some of the most fun you can have during Scream Fortress. But this stupid ass pit can go fuck itself. Would easily jump like 10 spots higher if not for this feature. Number 17, Synthetic. So this map initially looks like a very middle of the road Halloween map, and for a long time, that's what I've treated it as. But the more I've started playing on it to get a critical look for this video, the more it's grown on me a bit. There's nothing really amazing or terrible about it. It just has a pretty good layout with an enjoyable midpoint and a few sneaky tunnels to catch people off guard. The big letdown is the map's main boss, the Toastmaster. It hypes you up with a unique design and cool spawn animation, but then you put him on the field and he's just a Skeleton King reskin. A concept this fun could spring for a few more unique mechanics, I think. Also, the sniper sightlines on this map can be fucking brutal, but there are usually enough spells online to help mitigate it a bit. Overall, Synthetic is pretty alright, but I do think there's some missed potential here that might be worth experimenting on in a future update. And that's it for the C tier maps. Now we're moving on to B tier, the upper quartile of content quality. From this point onwards, all of these maps are ones that I'm throwing into my rotation pretty frequently, even if I do uncheck them from time to time. I'll play these ones regularly even after the contracts are done. This is where they start getting good for me. Number 16, Hell Train. This is another map I thought I'd put a lot higher initially, if for no other reason than it reminds me of Convoy, one of the game's most iconic community maps that never got an official implementation. The vomit-inducing acid trip of a skybox might get you motion sick, but in a weird way, Hell Train feels like home to me. Reminds me of the good old days, where weird community maps like this were a much bigger presence. On the gameplay front though, it's above average. Typically the best CTF maps in TF2 are the ones where the mid areas are actually enjoyable to fight on. Hell Train has the opposite groove going. There's something really cinematic about climbing your way up to the other team's mansion, fighting floor after floor of the opposing team, before finally reaching the apex and booking it for the main bridge. I love the unease of entering each room and not being sure if someone's gonna meet you there and invalidate all that climbing. Encounters feel a lot more sporadic than the other CTF maps, and for that reason, I like this one more than most of the base game ones. My only real gripe with Hell Train is that the middle area is just kind of mid, and also the elevated sentry spots can be very annoying. Really hinders corner peeking to take them out. Outside of that though, it's a pretty good map. Number 15, Dynamite. The first showcase of a tug-of-war style game type for TF2, and I think it works incredibly well. The group-wide pushes feel way more satisfying than a typical payload card cap, and holding down the capture zone while the enemy team kamikazes from above is one of the single most fun parts of any Scream Fortress map. It also has a shitload of jump power-ups with a surprising lack of invisible walls to where shooting out of the cannon doesn't feel limiting at all. That's where Dynamite's only real flaw comes from. Rollouts are such a non-issue that heavy stacking tends to be too dominant a strategy. Doesn't help either that most sniper flanks are left unguarded. Everyone's too busy up in the air. Also, the frame rate drops on this map can be atrocious. Another thing worth fixing. Map's got issues, to be sure, but Tug of War is the most obvious game mode that could have ever been added to TF2, and it fits the game like a glove. This is another case of a map where you could easily tone down a lot of the more eccentric elements and turn it into a real meat and potatoes game mode. I also think that this one is worth a second go. Number 14, Moonshine. As far as spell cleave maps go, where the points are made up and the objective doesn't matter, I think Moonshine is the best of the bunch. It's got a few interior barrier areas that make for some fun CQC fights, but most of the map is incredibly open. Now usually, King of the Hill maps like these end up being invaded with battle engies and sniper mains, but Moonshine doesn't have that problem. Sentries can't be built in the water, and spells alongside Marasmus RTD make Sniper less of an optimal choice compared to other classes. The Wheel of Fate also returns, and shocker, it actually enhances the experience when you're not taking a nap every 2 minutes inside of a bullshit truce. That's why I have Moonshine so high up. It shirks a lot of the most common issues that come with both expansive map design and spells being a constant premise. I still find working towards a common objective more enjoyable than spontaneous spell fights for the hell of it, and that's the reason why Moonshine isn't any higher, but I do wonder how a more toned down player destruction version of this map would work. I feel like that would appeal to me more. As it is right now though, it fits the role of a wacky DM map better than most others. Number 13, Mansylvania. In the same way that maps like Hell Tower and Megalo were a lot lower than I initially thought, Mansylvania genuinely shocked me with how much it skyrocketed up the charts for me. The layout strikes a really nice balance between tight areas and more open ones, to where every class can perform well. Spells can occasionally be oppressive, but they're less of the one-shot playmakers than they are on Monster Bash, or any other game mode for that matter. My only real issues with Mansylvania relate to the objective, particularly the drop zone. The Castle Underworld is probably my least favorite of all the player destruction ones in the game. The team fights aren't as prominent, and the bright beacon lighting feels very over-designed. I also find the Vampire Man power-up upon exit to be a little bit too overkill. I understand it's meant to be a flavor mechanic, but 20 seconds is way too long a duration. The winning team can often end up snowballing just from staying coalesced after a long escape. So no, not everything is a home run here, but player destruction maps are just meant to be kill playgrounds with a serviceable objective. In that respect, Mansylvania's layout is a home run, which is why I have it so high up. It might have some issues, but it nails the most important part by far. Number 12. Freaky Fair. If you thought perks turned every class into a Hell Demon Olympian, you've seen nothing yet. Freaky Fair has a very simple premise. Take MBM upgrades, shuffle the balance a bit, and throw it onto a 3CP map. Now obviously, being the MBM guy, I'm quite biased towards this one, if for no other reason than I already know what's broken. But surprisingly, the reasons I enjoy Freaky Fair have little to do with that. Yes, it's an absurd, chaotic, and unbalanced as fuck game mode, but that's what makes it interesting to go full Mythbuster and experiment with as much as you can. So many classes to optimize, so many weapon combinations to try, so many upgrades to shift around in different orders. Freaky Fair has so much replayability, it's insane. In terms of loadout modifications, you could literally spend weeks playing nothing but this map and still have some combos left on the table. I get it, I'm obviously more favorable to playing around with MBM upgrades than most, but I just keep having fun here. It doesn't matter how many games end in a stalemate. It doesn't matter how many games are locked down by a max building health wrangled sentry. It doesn't matter how claustrophobic the interior can feel at times. I keep finding reasons to come back. Call it familiarity bias, call it being easily amused by a roided up bison soldier, I don't care. Freaky Fair might be one of the craziest maps in the game, but it'll probably stay one of my favorites for a very long time. Number 11. Cauldron. One of the more slept on Scream Fortress maps in recent years. It's about as far as you can get from stuff like Freaky Fair. I think it all comes down to the map appearing very simple in theming, but I'd argue that simplicity is its greatest strength. Cauldron's main gimmick is that every point cap is followed up with some kind of server-wide status effect, be it crits, underworld portals, or fireball AoEs, all with a really cool boil-over animation as it happens. Similarly to maps like Blowout and Gully Wash, Cauldron's midpoint is heavily obfuscated by massive amounts of cover, which leads to a lot of fun musical chair-style chase downs at mid, and helps make sniper sightlines a lot less oppressive. Outside of that, there's not much else going on here. It's a well-designed layout with a couple of basic gameplay modifications. Nothing overly extravagant, but you don't need that when you got the fundamentals down so well. Number 10. Cursed Cove. I said that player destruction maps had the best track record of any game mode out there, and Cursed Cove is what I think deserves the bronze medal. The layout can be claustrophobic in some areas, but that's made up for in spades by the mid area being a wealth of 10-player skirmishes. There's a very clear progression transition between winning the mid-fights and slowly inching closer to the enemy team's spawn. It's a push and pull dynamic that I think works really well. Cursed Cove's underworld area is also by far the most enjoyable drop zone in the game to fight in. You actually have to keep your guard up when entering into the ship. It's pretty equivalent to maps like Mansylvania without a lot of the mechanical drawbacks. The only reason it's not higher is because of one very big flaw: the map size. You really need a 12v12 lobby in order to have enough encounter fuel to keep both teams busy. Even cutting it by a third makes the beach a lot more barren. It starts having the 5 CP problem, where a lot of the game becomes a walking simulator with the occasional 1v1s in between. For that reason, I can't put it any higher, but when the server's packed, it's almost always a good time. Number 9. Gorge Event. Gorge has always been one of my personal favorite TF2 maps, and the spookified version actually makes it even better in some areas. Adding extra high ground to play around with was a fantastic choice, as was the addition for a quicker rollout to the midsection for some offense classes. These changes actually have greater gameplay implications than people realize. The flanks see more action, snipers have less uptime, and the right choke is less populated. Fantastic change. I genuinely think the base version of the map should play the exact same way. The giant hole in the floor I'm a bit ambivalent towards, but it does make for the occasional funny air blast moment. The only place where Gorge shits the bed are the skeletons. Fuck the skeletons. I know I haven't mentioned them much in this video, but that's because they're usually a garnish to treating every point like a spell pinata and beating it until it bleeds. There's always a bigger fish there, but throw skeletons onto a map where all of those markers are absent, and they really do stick out like a sore thumb. They literally made Gorge but better, and then made it worse again. I say try out a year where they're removed and see how the player base likes it. I have a feeling that most people would prefer them turned off. Number 8. Los Muertos. This one started off with a bit of a love it or hate it reputation, but over time, it feels like the scales have tipped more towards the love category. I personally welcome that completely. It's a King of the Hill map where ultra spells are a constant presence, but unlike so many of the others, has a lot of accessible retreats to get out of harm's way, and the point is open enough to where their effectiveness is diluted. It's got some really scenic lighting with a really chill atmosphere to go along with it, and that 5-minute point timer is much appreciated. It's a pain when attached to a bad map, but a pleasure when you actually enjoy sticking around longer. The only real flaw of Los Muertos is the underworld is pretty uninteresting, and despite all my praises for the map layout, I don't think the purple spell on exit was necessary at all. I think an uber charge akin to Cauldron and many of the maps coming up would fit a lot better. I'm still not the biggest spell whore out there, so I can't justify placing it in the tier above, but as far as maps go where they're a central mechanic, Los Muertos does it better than most. And now we're moving on to the A tier, my personal 7 favorite Scream Fortress maps in the game. These are the ones I rarely, if ever, take out of my queue pool, and will usually stick around to the end each and every time. They haven't gotten boring for me yet, and I don't think they ever will. Number 7. Maple Ridge. If I were to rank my favorite Scream Fortress maps based on looks and looks only, this one would be an easy number 1. Everything about Maple Ridge oozes a cozy late-night Halloween feel, like a secluded hangout spot that's lively for one night and one night only. It plays pretty great too. It's a simple map all things considered, but layout-wise, I find it comparable to, funnily enough, Blowout. Think about it, the lengthy spawn section that makes camping the doors very difficult, heading to a closed-off interior with more CQC fight potential, which leads into a square-shaped middle area with an obstructed point cover, and a low-ground retreat when the spam gets too heavy. I can't be the only one who's noticed the comparison, right? Maple Ridge is just Blowout but comfier. It does have a couple of flaws though. Some areas are a bit too open, I find the flank to be a bit awkwardly merged, and there's a horrible sightline in one area of the map. But I'm willing to deal with all of that just for the atmosphere alone. The vibes of Maple Ridge are too immaculate for me to justify putting it anywhere outside of the A tier. Number 6. Pit of Death. The second best player destruction map in the game, and for a while, my personal favorite. It's a more condensed DM map with a lot of flanks, differing levels of high ground, and multiple pathways to funnel fights towards the objective. This is great design that allows for a nice balance of large team fights around some of the chokes, but also a fair bit of 1v1s while out and about. Pit of Death also doubles as my favorite map in the game to have spells as a central mechanic. They only spawn whenever the pit is open, so while the soul collectors are in the underworld playing the objective, it allows the losing team to mop up a greater percentage of the spellbooks, kinda like a pseudo comeback mechanic. The pit is also my favorite drop zone in the game. I love the frantic chase sequences while the other other team tries to bullet hell you away from the deposit area. My only real gripe with Pit of Death is holy shit, sentries can be a pain. There's a really awful Badwater Last style peak area right in front of the objective, and it absolutely blows. Coming back to a level 2 sentry being online after running the Underworld Gauntlet can kill a lot of the fun if your team isn't focused up. Outside of that though, it's a great map and one I'll keep coming back to. Number 5. Harvest Event. This is where it all began. The first Halloween map ever added to TF2 alongside a Scream Fortress event. They really kept things simple to start off with. The map is just base Harvest, but with a couple of broken light fixtures, the occasional haunted ghost, and pumpkins of the crit and exploding variety that have since become staples of every Scream Fortress map in the game. I'll say it, I actually prefer this one to the original version of Harvest, which is an opinion I hold for no other map reskin in the entire game. Think about it, the biggest problem with Harvest as a map is without a doubt the horrid sniper sightlines. Now, those still exist, and yes, are very annoying, but guess which class benefits the least from Crumpkins? Sniper. Whereas before, Harvest was headshot paradise, and quite frankly still is, at least here, he's the one on the receiving end of most of the broken shit, and that helps equalize the pain a bit. Also, this is probably the coolest skybox shift in the entire game, and that's saying something when it's had 16 years of map additions to compete with. It's undeniably a classic, and will likely remain in most people's queue list for a very long time. Number 4. Farmageddon. The single best player destruction map in all of Scream Fortress, and if you told me that 2 years ago, I would have laughed in your face. Farmageddon just has all the benefits of the other DM maps without any of the drawbacks. Its design is a lot more compact, which forces players into fights more often, especially large team fights around the pumpkin's flank. But despite being on the tinier side, it never feels congested. The areas are open enough to where you're never forced into tight corridors while scrounging for player table scraps. But at the same time, things aren't so open to the point where snipers are a dominant presence. In that sense, it's very reminiscent of Monster Bash, but this one doesn't have a dickbag with purple spells one-shotting everything before retreating back into Satan's handbasket. That gimmick is replaced by Scarecrows, a reskin version of the skeleton NPCs I've maligned many times earlier in this video. However, unlike virtually every other map in the game where they're present, they actually serve a purpose, dropping Weed Killer upon a successful kill. They managed to add skeletons to a map and actually make them fun to interact with. That is unheard of. The only area where I think Farmageddon lacks is the deposit zone. It gets the job done, but it's probably the most boring one in the game. Besides that, everything else is top notch. This has been one of the most surprisingly great additions for me personally. Number 3. Laughter. For a long time, I'm talking literally years, Laughter was easily my favorite Halloween map in the game. The haunted carnival atmosphere is extremely memorable, and it keeps the mechanics very simple, with Crumpkins and Pumpkin Bombs being the only real hazards outside of the underworld, which by the way is one of the most enjoyable in the game. It's got a wide variety of themes and fits the funhouse vibe perfectly, much more intriguing than a shady stone walkway with a couple of chasms to the right. But all of that is second to Laughter's main triumph. The map layout is just perfect. The flanks are some of the most enjoyable in the game, snipers don't dominate in the slightest, and the escalators jolting you onto the point for a surprise high ground attack is such a unique feature that never gets old. Genuinely, the only reason why Laughter dropped down from number 1 is because Boardwalk, the summer version of the map, got put into the base game earlier this year. Yeah guys, I know it's a reskin. Did you also need me to tie your shoes? In retrospect, I played it way too safe giving Boardwalk a high B tier. It's very quickly become one of my most played TF2 maps in a very short amount of time. For that reason, Laughter has lost some of its appeal for me because I've just gotten burned out from playing it so much. The very definition of suffering from success. But I'm happy to see such a well-designed map wiggle its way into the permanent rotation. It absolutely, without a doubt, deserves it. Number 2. Toxic. Surprised? I thought you'd be. Toxic is a map that I haven't heard much conversation about, but in my eyes, it's probably the single most underrated map to ever make its way into a seasonal TF2 event. Everything about this map is borderline perfect. The flanks make for some really fun ambushes, there are differing amounts of cover and height advantages that offer a lot of encounter variety, the sewer run is one of the most fun underworlds in the game, and the sniper perch gets easily spammed out, so half the game isn't spent with your brain matter on edge. It hits a lot of the same notes that Laughter does, but it has a harder job to do because of how much more expansive the map is. And it nails it. Even the VATS insta-killing you is something that rarely pops up, but it's such a nice flavor addition that really sells the feeling of the map. And let's not forget that the capture time is 5 minutes, so you get to spend even more time here before being forced into a requeue. Throughout this video, I've gone through a lot of fluff. The 2020s era has not really been kind to Scream Fortress by and large. I even chalked a lot of my admiration for this map up to recency bias during the 2024 event. And sure, 2 month-long seasons isn't the longest time horizon in the world, but my opinion on this one feels pretty damn well solidified. Toxic is the single best map we've gotten in over a decade, and I'll likely never chuck it out of my permaqueue. But there's still one map that I like just a little bit more. Number 1. Man Manor. You knew it was coming. What else could it be other than Man Manor? This has gotta be the most iconic Scream Fortress map in the game by a significant margin, and that's for good reason. One might refer to the mansion redesign, lighting effects, or the fact that Mountain Lab is a pretty well-liked map, but we all know what people actually come for. The Horseless Headless Horseman is the single most memorable boss in TF2 history. Everything from the screen shaking, to the absurd boss design, to the high-pitched battle cries, to the text on screen saying "you're it," even the summoning animation and boss music is enough to illuminate the entire server. Think about that for a moment. With the possible exception of Krampus, the Horseman is the only stage hazard in modern TF2 that players actually get excited to fight. A soulful enhancement of what was already a great map to begin with. Every other hazard is met with mild indifference or "oh shit, here we go again" syndrome. The bullet we dodged by not giving this map the Ghost Fort treatment cannot be overstated. That's not even mentioning how you're able to literally craft the Head Taker axe for yourself, a take-home memento for when the event is finally over. I don't have mine, by the way, I'm still waiting till marriage. Funnily enough, Man Manor actually gets a similar rebalance treatment reminiscent of Harvest. The worst part about Mountain Lab as a map are the sniper sightlines. Some of them are fucking brutal, but just like Harvest, the Crumpkins and Pumpkin Bombs littered around the map disproportionately benefit every other class, and, oh right, the Soul Demon from Hell treating your neck like a free breakfast at Denny's. There's undeniably a nostalgia factor at play here, but there's a reason why people keep coming back to this one year after year after year. Even new TF2 players have a great time on Man Manor. A well-designed map with fantastic visuals and a flavorful boss fight that people actually find desirable to take out. This is Scream Fortress at its best. Man Manor does literally everything right, and for that reason, it takes home the number 1 spot pretty handily. So there we go. That's every Scream Fortress map in the game, ranked from the worst to the best. Initially, I thought this video would be like under 20 minutes, but then I remembered the YouTuber prerequisite of having a degree in yapology. If you stuck around to the end, just know I very much appreciate it. Twitter, Twitch, Discord, and second channel are all in the description, and that's all I got. See ya.